We are now connected, Leo. Okay, take a deep breath and settle in for a moment because the energy I'm feeling around you feels very different from what you've been carrying lately. This doesn't feel like a story about chasing anymore. It feels like a story about finally letting go. And somehow, the moment you stopped running, after answers, after validation, after people who couldn't meet you where you stood, everything around you began to shift. Something about this reading feels important, not because of what's coming towards you, but because of who you're becoming as you move through it. So trust that if this message found its way to you today, there may be something here your soul is ready to hear. Welcome, my beautiful Leo. I'm truly grateful you're here. Let's take a look at the cards and see what wants to reveal itself. The first thing that catches my attention is the Three of Cups. And honestly, Leo, this card doesn't feel the way people expect it to feel. What I see here is someone who spent a very long time trying to keep a connection alive. Someone who kept finding reasons to stay hopeful. Someone who kept saying, maybe they just need more time. Maybe one more conversation. Maybe one more chance. Maybe one more opportunity for them to finally understand what this connection really meant. You know, that's the feeling I'm sitting with. Because I don't see someone who gave up easily. I see someone who cared deeply. Someone who was willing to be patient. Someone who kept looking for the good in another person long after most people would have walked away. And that takes strength, a lot more strength than people realize. The Three of Cups feels almost bittersweet here. Because while there is warmth around it, there is also a quiet realization that not everyone values what they are given. Not everyone recognizes loyalty when it stands right in front of them. Some people only see what they had after it begins slipping through their fingers. And I keep feeling that for many of you. There was a moment when you finally stopped explaining yourself. You stopped trying to prove your intentions. You stopped trying to make someone understand what should have been obvious all along. Okay, the Page of Swords is sitting here, and the energy around this card feels interesting. Because someone was watching. Someone was paying attention. Someone noticed more than they admitted. But noticing and showing up are two very different things. That's what keeps coming through. You may have felt their eyes on you. Their curiosity, their attention, their occasional effort. Yet every time you hoped for something deeper, something meaningful, something real, it somehow stopped halfway. Like a door that never fully opened. Like a conversation that never became the conversation. Like someone standing at the edge of your world without ever stepping all the way into it. And Leo, I think that became exhausting. Not because you expected perfection. Not because you expected someone to have all the answers. But because there comes a point where effort needs to be returned. Care needs to be matched. Presence needs to be felt. And I feel like you reached a place where you quietly asked yourself a question. A very important question. What happens if I stop? What happens if I stop reaching out? What happens if I stop carrying this? What happens if I stop being the one who keeps the connection alive? And honestly, that question changed everything. Because the moment you stopped chasing, something unexpected happened. You started hearing your own voice again. You started noticing your own needs again. You started remembering who you were before all this waiting began. The Nine of Cups is sitting here, and what strikes me isn't excitement. It's peace. It's a different kind of happiness. A quieter kind, a stronger kind, the kind that doesn't depend on someone texting back. The kind that doesn't depend on being chosen. The kind that doesn't depend on somebody finally realizing your worth. Because somewhere along the way, Leo, you started realizing it yourself, and that changes a person. You begin carrying yourself differently. You begin protecting your energy differently. You become more careful about who gets access to your heart. Not because you're becoming cold. Not because you're becoming closed off. Quite the opposite, actually. You finally understand the value of what you carry inside you. You finally understand that your love is not something that should be handed to people who treat it casually. And I keep seeing this image. It's almost like someone who spent months standing outside a locked door, knocking, waiting, hoping, wondering if somebody on the other side would open it. Then one day they turn around, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, just clarity. And the moment they walk away from that door, they notice an entire road behind them that they never saw before. That's what this feels like. It feels like perspective returning. It feels like self-respect returning. It feels like life slowly becoming bigger than one unanswered question. And honestly, Leo, the cards feel different once that happens. Because the energy is no longer circling around what somebody else might do. It's beginning to circle around you, your growth, your peace, your future, your relationship with yourself. And as I sit with these cards a little longer, I can't help but notice how much calmer the energy feels than where it started. Not because every answer has arrived, not because every emotion has disappeared, but because something inside you has started settling into place. Something inside you no longer feels the need to chase what refuses to choose you. And that shift alone feels far more important than it first appears. Something shifts when the Queen of Swords enters the reading. The atmosphere feels different, cleaner, stronger, almost like opening the windows after living too long in a room filled with stale air. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you forgot what it felt like to move freely? That's what I'm sitting with here. Because Leo, this doesn't feel like confidence that comes from attention. It doesn't feel like confidence that comes from being admired. It doesn't even feel like confidence that comes from success. It feels deeper than that. It feels like the kind of confidence that appears when you stop negotiating with your own worth. Honestly, there's something incredibly powerful about a person who no longer needs everyone to understand them, and that's what I keep seeing around you. The Queen of Swords feels like someone who has spent enough time learning hard lessons. Not bitter, not angry, just clear. Very, very clear. Clear about what deserves access to their energy. Clear about what deserves their time. Clear about what belongs in their life and what doesn't. And what strikes me is how quietly this change happened. I don't feel a dramatic moment. I don't see a big confrontation. I don't see doors slamming or bridges burning. This feels more like waking up one morning and realizing something no longer has power over you. You still remember it. You still understand what happened. Yet the emotional weight begins to loosen. The grip begins to soften. And suddenly your attention starts moving somewhere else. Toward yourself. Toward your own life. Toward the things that make you feel alive again. The Nine of Cups is still sitting here, and every time I look at this card, I see someone becoming comfortable in their own company. Okay, let's talk about that for a moment. Because I think some of you have been rediscovering pieces of yourselves that got lost while focusing on everyone else. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a version of yourself you haven't seen in years. The version that laughed more easily. The version that made plans without needing anyone else's approval. The version that wasn't constantly checking whether someone else was happy. And I keep feeling this beautiful sense of return. Not returning to the past, returning to yourself. That's different. The Three of Cups catches my eye again. And honestly, it feels lighter here. The energy around it feels brighter. Almost like life is slowly expanding. Maybe your world became very small for a while. Maybe too much emotional energy was invested in one situation. One connection, one question, one uncertainty. When that happens, everything else can fade into the background without us even realizing it. Friends, interests, opportunities, experiences, simple moments of joy. Yet the Three of Cups feels like those things beginning to reappear. Not all at once, just little glimpses. A conversation that makes you laugh unexpectedly. An invitation you almost declined. A place you haven't visited in a long time. A moment where you catch yourself smiling and don't immediately remember why. Those moments matter more than people think, because healing rarely arrives in one dramatic event. Sometimes it arrives through ordinary moments that slowly remind you who you are. And Leo, I feel like you're becoming magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with trying. That's the interesting thing. People often become most attractive when they're no longer focused on being noticed, when they're busy living, busy growing, busy building a life that feels meaningful to them. The Queen of Swords keeps drawing my attention back. She isn't chasing anyone around this reading. She's not persuading. She's not convincing. She's not proving. She's simply standing in her truth. And that energy changes everything around it. You know, there's a difference between wanting to be chosen and knowing your own value. Those two things can sometimes look similar from the outside, but internally they're worlds apart. One waits, the other lives. One seeks permission. The other gives permission to itself. One looks outward for confirmation. The other builds confidence from within. And I feel like many of you are standing somewhere in the middle of that transition. Some days feel strong. Some days still feel uncertain. Some days you move forward effortlessly. Other days old questions try to pull you backward. That's normal. That's human. What matters is that the center of gravity is changing. Your energy isn't orbiting around someone else's choices anymore. It's beginning to orbit around your own life, and honestly, that creates space. Space for new ideas. Space for new experiences. Space for possibilities you couldn't fully see before. I keep getting this image of someone standing on top of a hill, not because they've reached some final destination, not because everything is figured out, just because they're finally high enough to see the landscape differently. The view changes when you stop staring at the same closed door. You begin noticing roads. You begin noticing openings. You begin noticing opportunities that were always there but hidden behind your focus. The Queen of Swords seems to understand something important. Not every chapter deserves endless revisiting. Not every question deserves endless analysis. Not every person deserves unlimited access to your emotional energy. And there is freedom in accepting that. Real freedom. The kind that allows you to wake up and ask a different question. Not, why didn't they choose me? Not, what could I have done differently? Not, will they finally understand? A completely different question. What do I want? The moment that question becomes more important than every other question, the energy of the reading begins to change in a very noticeable way. And that's exactly what I'm seeing happening here. Something else begins to emerge from the reading the longer I sit with it. The Queen of Swords is still here, but her energy feels quieter than before, less focused on boundaries, more focused on direction. Almost like someone standing at a crossroads who no longer feels confused about where they came from and is beginning to pay attention to where they're going. And that's where the Eight of Wands starts pulling my attention. Honestly, Leo, this card feels alive, not chaotic, not overwhelming, just alive. Like movement returning after a long period of stillness. Like circulation returning to a part of life that had been asleep for a while. You know those moments when ideas begin appearing out of nowhere? You're washing dishes, driving somewhere, sitting by yourself with a cup of coffee, not actively searching for answers, not forcing clarity, yet something suddenly lands in your mind, a thought, a possibility, a new perspective, and you immediately feel different afterward. That's the kind of energy I'm seeing around you. Because what feels important isn't that somebody else is finally speaking. It feels like your own inner voice is becoming easier to hear. For a while, there may have been too much noise, too many opinions, too many expectations, too many emotional distractions competing for your attention. The kind of distractions that slowly pull your focus away from yourself. The kind that make you question things you already know deep down. The kind that keep you circling the same emotional territory over and over again. Yet something feels different here. The Queen of Swords almost seems uninterested in all that noise now. She isn't standing with her attention turned toward confusion. She's facing somewhere else entirely. And I keep getting this feeling that many of you have recently started experiencing little moments of clarity that seem almost random. A conversation that suddenly makes sense. A realization that arrives weeks after something happened. An idea that appears while you're doing something completely unrelated. Okay, let me explain what I'm seeing. It's almost like life has been trying to hand you pieces of a puzzle. Not all at once. One piece here, one piece there. A small insight, a subtle nudge. A quiet feeling you can't fully explain. The Eight of Wands feels like those pieces beginning to arrive more frequently. And the interesting thing is that these insights don't seem connected at first. One might involve your work. Another might involve your personal life. Another might involve a dream you've been carrying around for years without acting on it. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, they seem connected by a common thread. A thread that's trying to pull you closer to yourself. I keep hearing the phrase, pay attention. Not in a fearful way. Not because something dramatic is happening. More like life is whispering instead of shouting. And because it's whispering, you have to become quiet enough to hear it. Honestly, I think that's why the energy feels so different after everything you've been through. When you're constantly chasing something, your attention is always running ahead of you. You're focused on the next response, the next outcome, the next sign, the next piece of validation. There isn't much room left to notice what's happening inside. Yet this reading feels like someone slowing down enough to finally hear their own thoughts again. The Eight of Wands keeps showing me movement, but not necessarily physical movement, mental movement, creative movement, spiritual movement, the feeling of internal doors opening, the feeling of possibilities expanding, the feeling of seeing options where you once saw limitations. And Leo, I have to say this. Some of these ideas may initially seem unrealistic. You may dismiss them. You may talk yourself out of them. You may immediately start listing reasons why they won't work. Yet the energy around these cards feels very different from that. The Queen of Swords doesn't seem interested in dismissing possibilities simply because they're unfamiliar. She seems curious, open, observant, willing to look at things from a new angle. And I wonder if that's part of what's changing for you. The willingness to imagine a future that doesn't look exactly like the one you once expected. Because sometimes growth asks us to release more than people. Sometimes it asks us to release old stories, old assumptions, old definitions of success, old versions of ourselves, the versions that no longer fit who we're becoming. It feels almost excited about that possibility. Not because everything is certain, not because every answer has arrived, simply because movement creates opportunities that standing still never could. I keep seeing someone looking out a window during a long journey. The landscape is changing, gradually. almost imperceptibly, 1 mile at a time. If they stare too closely, they might think nothing is happening. Yet, if they look back after a while, they realize they're somewhere completely different from where they started. That's what this energy feels like. Subtle changes accumulating, small realizations building on top of each other, new ideas beginning to connect. A growing sense that there may be more available to you than you previously believed. And the fascinating thing is that none of it seems to arrive through force. None of it seems to arrive through struggle. The cards almost seem to suggest that the more you listen, the more you notice. The more you notice, the more you understand. The more you understand, the easier it becomes to recognize which direction feels right for you. And as I sit here with the Queen of Swords and the Eight of Wands together, there is a feeling that something inside you has become far more willing to trust what it already knows. A different rhythm starts moving through the reading here. The Eight of Wands is still carrying that feeling of motion, but something else is appearing beside it. Something more solid, more visible, more grounded in the real world. The Four of Wands catches my attention immediately, and honestly, Leo, it feels like standing in a doorway and realizing you're no longer where you used to be, not fully arrived somewhere new, not completely finished with the journey, just far enough to look behind you and recognize how much has changed. You know, sometimes growth happens so gradually that we don't notice it while it's happening. We're too close to it, too busy living through it, too busy dealing with everyday life. Then one day something small happens, a conversation, an opportunity, an invitation, a moment of recognition. And suddenly you realize you're responding differently than you would have 6 months ago. Maybe even differently than you would have a few weeks ago. That's the feeling I get from these cards. The Four of Wands doesn't feel loud, it feels meaningful. Like life quietly placing a marker in the ground and saying, look how far you've come. And what I find fascinating is that the energy around this card doesn't seem connected to struggle. For so long, many of you have been operating from effort, trying harder, understanding more, fixing more, carrying more, thinking more. The Eight of Wands almost seems to be changing that pattern, because the movement around you doesn't feel forced anymore. It feels natural, like a current beginning to carry you instead of you constantly swimming against it. Okay? I keep seeing someone planting seeds a long time ago, not knowing whether anything would grow, not receiving immediate results, not receiving constant encouragement, just continuing because something inside them believed it mattered. And honestly, Leo, I think many of you underestimate how much you've been building behind the scenes, not just externally, internally, the patience you've developed, the self-awareness you've developed, the boundaries you've developed, the resilience you've developed. Those things don't always produce immediate rewards, yet they become foundations, and the Four of Wands feels very aware of foundations. I don't feel a sudden miracle here. I feel something becoming ready. There's a difference, a very important difference. The Wheel of Fortune begins turning in the background of this reading, and every time I look at it, I get the feeling of timing. Not control, not force, timing. The kind of timing that cannot be rushed. The kind of timing that reveals itself only after certain lessons have been lived through. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of standing in an airport waiting for a delayed flight. At first, every minute feels frustrating. You check the clock, you check the screen. You wonder why things aren't moving. Eventually, you stop checking. You sit down, you accept where you are, and strangely enough, that's usually when the announcement comes. Not because your acceptance caused it, simply because the timing finally arrived. There's something about that energy here. The Wheel of Fortune doesn't seem interested in explaining itself. It simply keeps moving. And I feel like some of you are beginning to notice subtle signs of movement around you. A conversation opening, a possibility appearing, a door that wasn't visible before, a chance encounter, a piece of information arriving at the exact moment you needed it. Nothing dramatic on its own. Yet when you step back, the pattern becomes easier to see. The Eight of Wands feels almost eager, like messages traveling through the air, like opportunities looking for somewhere to land, like momentum gathering speed. And honestly, the reason this energy feels so different is because you're no longer chasing it. That's what keeps standing out to me. Imagine trying to catch a butterfly. The harder you run after it, the further away it flies. Eventually you stop running, you sit down, you become still, and suddenly it lands somewhere nearby. Life can feel like that sometimes. Not because stillness magically creates results, because stillness allows you to notice what was already approaching. The Four of Wands keeps bringing me back to the image of an open doorway. Not a locked door, not a door that requires convincing, not a door that requires endless effort, an open doorway. And what's interesting is that this doorway doesn't seem connected to proving yourself. It doesn't seem connected to earning your worth. It doesn't seem connected to finally becoming good enough. It feels available because you've already done the work of becoming the person capable of walking through it. The wheel of fortune turns again, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. And I find myself thinking about all the moments that seemed insignificant while they were happening. Every difficult decision, every goodbye, every disappointment, every moment when you chose yourself even though it felt uncomfortable. Every time you walked away from something that no longer aligned with who you were becoming. Those moments often look small when we're living through them. Later, they reveal themselves as turning points. The cards seem to understand that. There is movement here. There is momentum here. There is a growing sense that the landscape around you is changing, not all at once, not in a way that demands attention, more like the first signs of daylight appearing before sunrise. The sky doesn't transform instantly, yet something unmistakable begins to shift. And the longer I sit with the Eight of Wands, the Four of Wands, and the Wheel of Fortune together, the more it feels like life is beginning to respond differently to the version of you that exists today than it did to the version of you that existed before. The feeling becomes almost impossible to ignore here, not because anything dramatic is demanding your attention, not because the cards are shouting, quite the opposite. The energy feels calm, steady, certain in a way that doesn't need to prove itself. The Nine of Cups is sitting at the center of this part of the reading, and every time my eyes return to it, I keep getting the image of someone standing in front of a horizon they couldn't fully see before. You know, there are seasons in life when all of our energy becomes focused on one outcome, one person, one goal, one version of happiness. We become convinced that if we can just reach that destination, everything else will finally make sense. Yet life has a strange way of expanding beyond the limits of our expectations. That's exactly what these cards feel like. The Nine of Cups doesn't seem concerned with the version of fulfillment you imagined months ago. It seems interested in something larger, something that fits who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. And honestly, Leo, I think that's why some of the changes happening around you may feel surprising, not because they're completely unexpected, because they're arriving from directions you weren't watching. The Wheel of Fortune turns again, and I keep feeling this sense of perspective. Imagine looking at an old photograph of yourself. You remember that version of you. You understand why they made the choices they made. You understand what they were hoping for. Yet you also know things they didn't know. You can see opportunities they couldn't see. You can see lessons they hadn't learned yet. You can see strengths they hadn't discovered yet. That's the feeling surrounding this Wheel of Fortune. It almost feels like life beginning to align with the wisdom you've gained along the way, not rewarding you, not testing you, simply responding to the person you've become through the experiences you've lived. Okay. Something else is standing out here. The Four of Wands feels incredibly important, not because of a specific event, not because of a particular outcome, because of the feeling attached to it, a feeling of belonging, a feeling of arriving somewhere emotionally, a feeling of no longer needing to fight every battle. And I wonder how long it's been since you've truly allowed yourself to feel that, to feel safe in your own decisions, to trust your own direction, to move forward without constantly looking over your shoulder. The Four of Wands almost feels like an invitation into that space, a space where life becomes less about survival and more about participation. Less about proving, more about experiencing, less about chasing, more about receiving. Honestly, that shift may be one of the biggest transformations happening in this entire reading. Because receiving requires a different kind of strength. Many people know how to struggle. Many people know how to push. Many people know how to keep fighting long after they're exhausted. Receiving is different. Receiving asks us to believe we're worthy without needing to earn every ounce of it first. Receiving asks us to trust what arrives instead of immediately questioning it. Receiving asks us to remain open, and that openness feels very present around you. The Eight of Wands continues moving through the reading like a current of fresh air. The feeling I get isn't that everything suddenly changes overnight. It's more like multiple pieces of your life beginning to move at the same time. A conversation here, an opportunity there, a realization somewhere else. Small developments that individually may not seem significant, yet together they create momentum. And momentum is powerful. Because momentum has a way of carrying us beyond places where effort alone could never take us. I keep seeing someone walking through a forest. For a long time, all they could see were the trees directly in front of them. The path felt narrow, limited, sometimes frustrating. Then the trail reaches higher ground. Suddenly the view opens. The forest is still there. The journey isn't over. Yet the perspective changes completely. That's what this part of the reading feels like. Perspective. The ability to see possibilities that were hidden from view before. The ability to recognize that the story may be bigger than the chapter you were focused on. The Wheel of Fortune seems to understand something important. Life rarely replaces what leaves us with an exact duplicate. It introduces something different, something that fits the present version of us. And that's why I keep feeling this gentle message for you, Leo. Leave room to be surprised. Leave room for life to arrive in forms you didn't expect. Leave room for opportunities that don't look exactly like the picture you once carried in your mind. Because sometimes what we're asking for and what we're truly ready for are two different things. The Nine of Cups feels aware of that distinction. There is a maturity surrounding this card, a sense that fulfillment becomes richer when it's built upon self-awareness rather than fantasy. And as these cards continue unfolding together, I find myself less interested in what specifically arrives and more interested in the version of you that will be there to meet it. The version who understands their worth. The version who no longer abandons themselves for approval. The version who has learned how to trust their own inner voice. The version who stopped chasing what wasn't choosing them. Because somewhere between the Eight of Wands, the Four of Wands, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Nine of Cups, there is a feeling that life is beginning to meet you from a completely different place than before. Honestly, Leo, if there's one thing these cards keep bringing me back to, it's this. Life started feeling different the moment you stopped trying to force it. The moment you stopped chasing answers that never arrived. The moment you stopped carrying connections that were never yours to carry alone. Something inside you became lighter. Something inside you became stronger. And maybe that's the real shift this reading has been talking about all along. Not what is coming toward you. Not who may notice you. Not what may happen next. But the person you've become while moving through all of it. The person who learned how to choose themselves. The person who learned that their value doesn't increase or decrease based on someone else's ability to see it. So if these messages resonated with you, take what feels right, leave what doesn't, and trust your own inner wisdom above everything else. Thank you for sharing this time and energy with me today, Leo. I truly appreciate every one of you. Until our paths cross again, take good care of yourself, keep moving forward in your own way. And remember, sometimes the things meant for you find their way to you the moment you stop running after them. Bye, Leo.